Since its release, iPhones have captivated the smartphone industry, literally redefining what we've come to know as a modern smartphone, iterating and evolving from model to model, getting consumers into a customary groove of major release followed by an S upgrade, wherein the hardware may look the same, but a lot of changes occur under the hood. And while the iPhone 12 to 13 may look like an S upgrade, it certainly has a lot more going on, and that more, you can argue, is substantial. My name's Adrian for Digital Dojos, and this is my review of Apple's iPhone 13 Pro Max. So the iPhone 13 series as a whole, be it the Pro or non-Pro model, offers a phone that's been upgraded in all of the essential categories. Better battery life, faster performance, improved screen tech, higher quality cameras. And while all of those are improved in the 13 series as a whole, the Pro models, which we'll be focusing on specifically for this review, take that aspect to the next level. Wherein the only difference in this case between, for example, the Pro Max and the non-Max edition is quite literally just screen size and battery life. So, if you're watching this and you're curious about the 13 as a whole, maybe you're looking at the iPhone 13, let's kind of summarize it very quickly. If you are coming from an iPhone 10 and below, or even argue iPhone 11 and below, I would argue that this is worth the upgrade. Now, if you're watching this and deciding, do you need the Pro between the 13 Pro and the 13 non-Pro? I'd argue probably not. However, if you care about having the best camera, if you know what a 120 hertz screen is in refresh rate, and you want the best possible iPhone you can go with in the lineup, then yeah, consider the Pro if your budget and everything aligns with it. However, otherwise, I think the standard 13 model will suffice. Again, if you're coming from the 12 series, the previous series, like I was, the 12 Pro Max, I'd actually recommend this is not worth upgrading to. However, for users who are on older devices, which is typically the vast majority, we're talking iPhone 10, iPhone 8s, XS, so on and so forth, this is a time that I think is actually worth a decent upgrade, bringing a lot of long-awaited features to the 13 line. All right, with all the essentials out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So I'm going to break it down into physical design, what's new, and a look at my overall experience before we kind of wrap up the review. So if you want to jump to any of those points, feel free to. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Physical design. At first glance, a 13 Pro Max in the 13 series as a whole looks identical to that of the 12 series, the previous phone that, it superseded. And I will be comparing it a lot to that of the 12 series since it's the previous generation. However, noting that a lot of people don't tend to upgrade year after year, and that's understandable. Majority of you are probably coming from something that's even older than 12 series, but this just makes it a better baseline to compare it to. And again, if you're skipping over the 12 series, then you're going to get an upgrade nonetheless. So, what's physically new in here? Well, two noticeable things. One, maybe not so noticeable at first glance, but the notch. The notch has been slightly reduced at the very top. So that infamous iPhone notch has been rearranged ever so slightly to get a slight reduction and get more screen space at the top of your iPhone. However, I'd argue with no additions. You're not getting a battery percentage meter. You're not getting extra space in the top right iOS corner when it comes to the software side. You're not getting a better FaceTime camera or better Face ID sensor. So really, you're just getting a slightly reduced notch, which is nice, but not that earth-shattering or game-changing. The phone in itself, when it comes to its physical markups or makeups, is heavier, and that's due to a lot of the new hardware that they packed in it. The new improved battery capacity, as well as those new cameras and sensors and lenses that they included in the back, means that the lenses ever so slightly protrude just a bit more outside of the back if you're coming from like a 12 Pro Max or even like an 11 Pro Max series of phones. And it's slightly heavier in hand. Even holding it alongside my 12 Pro Max when I first got these out of the box, it was just noticeably heavier to me personally, but nothing that's going to break the bank. However, if you're coming off of a phone that wasn't like a Max or 12 Pro series, then you're obviously going to notice a difference in, dimensions and size. Now, let's get into what's actually new on paper when it comes to the specs and everything running inside that of the new 13 Pro series. So first and foremost, this has an improved battery life across the board, which is always great to see, because when you see phones that have, improved on battery performance, cameras, so on and so forth, adding new tech to it, you tend to see a battery reduction, or maybe it stays the same. In this case, you're getting even longer battery life. Comparing it to that of the previous 12 Pro Max, you're getting 2 additional hours of screen time or more depending on your usage. They claim full day 28 hours of video playback. So Apple tends to have all these scenarios that you can measure like battery life, where they say like you can play videos on it for a full day of usage. But obviously when it comes down to it, it's always going to vary, right? How often you use your phone throughout the day, how often you have it with screen time. Are you watching videos? Are you playing games? Are you just checking emails now and again? You're going to get full day life out of this for the most part when it comes to just general usage of the phone. Obviously, if you push it, I'm sure you can drain it more, but it's always great to have more battery life at the end of the day, and the 13 Pro Max doesn't disappoint here. Now, powering a lot of this new hardware, you have the A15 Bionic chips in the Pro series. For the tech nerds out there who care about or the tech spec nerds who care about all that, we're talking 6-core CPUs, 2 performance and 4 efficiency cores. It's a 5-core GPU, and this is the same on the 13 Pro as it is on, the Pro Max as it is on the Pro. So again, the Max and the Pro, no difference whatsoever. If you're looking at the 13 line, I think there's like a slight difference in GPU cores and things like that, but again, it's pretty much the new A15 chip, and that's going to be efficient across the board. But it does make the kind of comparison between the Max and non-Max model that much more easier. You're not losing anything in performance. You're mainly just losing a little bit of battery life, or you're getting the smaller screen size. Speaking of screens, that's the next thing that's really new and has been really improved in the iPhone 13 Pro Max. First off, you have the brighter display. We're talking the Super Retina XDR, 200 nits brighter, just more vibrant across the board. And what that means really is across specific scenarios, like direct sunlight, when you're outdoors, low light, all those things, your screen is just going to have that much more brightness, which is always nice. It's not something necessarily that I felt was an issue on the 12 Pro Max, but nonetheless, especially if you're coming from older phones, it never hurts to have the ability to have a brighter display for a variety of scenarios and situations. Speaking of that display, you also got the new ProMotion 120 hertz refresh rate screens. This is what a lot of prosumers were waiting for, not the average everyday consumer, I'd argue. But essentially, refresh rate is the amount of times that your screen, refreshes. You're typically used to, on most devices, be it a computer or a phone, 60 hertz refresh rate. This is effectively doubling that. Now, this is nothing new. Computer monitors and gaming monitors have really specialized in this for years now. Even flagship phones on the Android side have been pushing 120 hertz plus refresh rate screens. This is the first time we're seeing Apple integrate it into their mobile phones. Apple has done it on their iPad Pro line of series, and now even recently on their MacBooks, and now finally again on the iPhone 13 Pro series. So, ProMotion specifically, when it comes to Apple, is a nice addition in that it's not constantly running at 120 hertz. And what does that even mean to have a higher refresh rate? Well, essentially, since the pixels are refreshing faster on your screen, it means the overall kind of, I wouldn't say performance, but responsiveness on your screen is just snappier. It's quicker. It's hard to kind of showcase in real time. It is something you have to experience and even see side by side with a 60 hertz refresh rate screen to really feel the difference. But once you see it, it is kind of hard to go back. And once you get accustomed to it, everything just kind of feels snappier, smoother, especially in mobile devices where you're quite literally like dragging on the screen with your finger, and you want to get that input and response time to line up with that. So again, the ProMotion screen, it's not constantly running at 120 hertz, which means it's more efficient. Let's say you're just looking at an image statically on your screen. It reduces the refresh rate, and it ups it depending on what you're doing. That means better battery life in combination with the better screen. Now, last but not least, and arguably the most important thing when it comes to what's new in these phones nowadays, whether it's Apple or Android or whatever brand there may be out there, is the cameras. And the cameras here across the board in the Pro series have always been the best possible version that you can get when it comes to videos and photos, The pros have the 3 lenses, so the telephoto, the wide, the ultra wide lenses. You're getting the best possible cameras you can when it comes to Apple's lineup here on the Pro Series. And all 3 lenses this year have been upgraded. While they're still that 12 megapixel sensors, they are bigger sensors. So what that means is they're allowing more light in. I think it's like 47% more light to be exact. You're still getting optical image stabilization across the board. Like I said, that better low light performance. The ultra wide has an f1.8 aperture. Telephoto has a 3x optical zoom. You have all the fancy technology behind it. You still have the deep fusion, the night mode, Apple Pro RAW, and this year you're getting the support for ProRes format, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, across the Pro line of phones. So the video recording can do HDR with Dolby Vision. I believe obviously you can still do the 4K video recording at 24, 25, 30, and now 60 FPS as it has been in the past. But the ProRes video format is what's going to be the big thing that a lot of higher end people in the video production space or just workflow who work with that format are going to be excited for, especially if you edit on the Mac and so on and so forth. ProRes, it's going to be a nice addition to that workflow, and it's nice to see Apple supporting it on the high end of prosumer phones. Majority of you, again, probably not going to care nor know what that is or even adopt that in your workflow. But again, prosumers here that we're targeting when it comes to the Pro phones, and it's nice to see. In short, all of the cameras have been upgraded. They are better in a variety of situations, and the bigger sensors really do make a big difference in those specific scenarios. We're talking low light, portrait photos, just making it so that regardless of the lens you use, you get a decent quality photo in the shots that you take. Now, taking that a step further, Apple released some new features in that of the cinematic mode. This is something that came to all iPhone 13s, not just the Pro series. This is like kind of rack focusing in DSLRs, or the foreground, the background, being able to switch and making that look a little bit more natural and smoother on the iPhone 13 series of phones. This is not limited to the Pro, by the way.
So we're shooting tests on cinematic.
It's cool.
The selfie camera.
It's great. It works decently. It's there's still a lot of hunting, not as smooth as a transition. It's iteration 1 of this, integration into the phones. It's cool to have. I'd argue right now it's more of a gimmick feature than anything. It's not something that really people are going to be using on a consistent basis. But again, it's nice to have. All right. All of that being said, how has my personal experience been with the iPhone 13 Pro Max on a day-to-day perspective? Benchmarks aside, technical specs aside, what matters at the end of the day is how this feels in your hand, how it works in everyday performance, and is it worth the upgrade for you? At $1,100 baseline, this phone is expensive. More and more of these, flagship phones are getting up there in price, and especially with the kind of pro and high-end models. But as of late, it has been the phones I've tend to run with for my daily drivers, the 12 Pro Max, the 11 Pro Max, so on and so forth. And it gets easy, I think, in my position, I've noticed, to not necessarily appreciate the technology we have in hand. I mean, we've come a long way over the years from the traditional, iPhones of years past to the OG when it first came out, to really appreciate all the technology that we get, even in these S upgrades. Though I will say, on paper, while I thought that I did not need to go to the 13 Pro Max, I'm happy I did. Did I absolutely need to from the 12 Pro Max? No. And I would still stand by the fact that if you're on a 12 series of phones, you do not need to upgrade. I'd argue that some of you on the 11 series can probably even get away with holding off for another year until the next iteration comes out. This is everything the iPhone 12 should have been, in my personal opinion. I get great everyday battery life, which I did get on my 12 Pro Max, but it's pushed even further, which is always nice. The cameras and all of its improvements, from the better sensors and the low light performance, made shooting with this much more effortless. Now, I carried both my 13 Pro Max and my 12 Pro Max side by side for a while when I first got these phones, for like 2 weeks. And in shooting between them, it was hard to discern like the very particular differences when you really get down to it. There are specific scenarios, like I mentioned, low light photography and using the new ultra wide or the improved ultra wide lens, and certain scenarios where those better sensors did kind of show their strong suits. But nonetheless, like the 12 Pro Max is still a phenomenal camera, and it will continue to be a phenomenal camera. But what I did notice with the 13 Pro Max is just whatever scenario I shot in, whatever lens I shot with, it never really like disappointed me, right? Like that was a great thing about it. Cinematic mode, cool. Not something I use on a consistent basis. I got some cool shots out of it. I'd argue the new macro lens or the new macro mode that you can use with the ultra wide lens and all of that is a cooler feature, and it produces some insane shots with the macro mode on the iPhone 13 Pro series. But at the end of the day, these are solid cameras. And if you get the iPhone 13 or 13 Pro series of phones, you are not going to be disappointed with these cameras. Hard stop. 120 hertz refresh rate screen. I adjusted to this pretty quickly. I'm a big fan of it. I use it on my computer screens. I use it on my iPad Pro, which I've been using more as of late. It was nice to have. I mean, out of the box, it was noticeable as somebody like myself who was looking for it. I will say the average consumer may not notice something like this until you really, they get used to using a 120 hertz screen and then go back to a 60 hertz screen. It's much more noticeable. It's nice to have. I'd argue that you could argue Apple could have maybe just done that with some performance upgrades and people would still buy it. But on top of that, you got the better battery life. On top of that, you got the better cameras. You got the improved things across the board. It's nice to finally have it, and I think what's best about it is that it's going to push the initiative going forward to integrate this into their baseline of phones down the road as cost makes more sense and they smooth out the technology behind it. We will see like an iPhone 14 or 15 with just a base 120 hertz screen where it won't just be a pro feature anymore at some time in the future. Cons when it came to my 13 Pro Max. I mean, really when it came down to it, I'd argue small nitty-gritty things that necessarily aren't just limited to the 13 Pro Max, but more software quirks. iOS 15, it was nice to have. It's a nice breath of fresh air and some cool updates. Again, it baffles me that they reduced the notch size on the 13 series and they don't give you the battery percentage meter. Like, to me, the notch reduction felt irrelevant because you didn't get anything out of it. I'd argue they could have waited until they could have got rid of the notch completely or, improve something, whether it's the FaceTime camera or the sensor behind Face ID or something to that effect where you just got more out of that physical change to the phone. And again, in combination with the iOS quirks, I just think they can do more there when it comes to iOS to make you utilize this Max and the big screen that you get. Speaking of screen, my screen tend to damage quicker and much more easier this time around. But again, this could be more user-prone error than anything and just kind of luck of the draw in terms of how I damaged it. But just putting it in my pocket and going back and forth and never really, putting it alongside things that are like keys or stuff like that I would be afraid would truly damage the screen because I tend to rock my phones nowadays without a case. I did notice a lot of like abrasions and surface level scratches that just even after 2-3 weeks of usage, I felt were just, again, really easily damaged on the screen versus my 12 Pro Max. Well, it has micro abrasions and tiny levels of cracks. You can't really see them, and it's been, a year plus of usage, where my 13 Pro Max I felt like just got a bit more banged up out of the box. But again, that's not necessarily something to blame on the design in itself, and maybe more so me for how I treated it. At the end of the day, the 13 Pro Max performed amazing, right? Like in terms of just general performance, usage, speed. Nowadays, I do less and less like gaming on my mobile device, but to pick up, the latest games in the iOS App Store and try them out on the phone was phenomenal. I mean, I think their series of chips have always been great and the performance you get there, but playing games felt smooth in combination with the 120 hertz refresh rate, like feels even smoother. This phone doesn't disappoint, right? My general usage, where I rely on more of it from a daily just work perspective, has been phenomenal. It hasn't crashed. It hasn't not been able to handle anything I've thrown at it. It's performed in all scenarios. At the end of the day, there's a couple things that you may be asking when it comes to the 13 Pro Max series and just the review and thoughts as a whole. I think to wrap up some of these Q&As that you may be, curious about, pro or non-pro, which one should you go with? Again, to reiterate, personally, I'd say if you care about having the best possible camera out there, you know what a 120 hertz screen is and you want that, or simply you just want the biggest possible screen out there, go pro. Otherwise, stick with the standard model. iPhone 12 users. Simply put, the 13 is everything the 12 should have been. That being said, if you were on the 12, already, I would simply just say wait. It's not necessarily worth the upgrade. And I could argue even the 11, you can maybe wait it out. 10 and below, if you upgrade to the 13, you will not be disappointed. This will be across the board for users on older devices, a huge leap forward in terms of what you get in performance, technology, and the new stuff behind it, especially if you're going to like the Pro series of phones. There's just going to be so much more features and hardware here that you can leverage coming from those older devices. At the end of the day, upgrading always comes at a question of what are you willing to spend and what is your budget and what do you do on a consistent basis with your mobile phone. That's going to matter the most. Nowadays, we also live in a point where there's a lot of great upgrade paths, both from carriers and Apple directly, that make it more cost effective and more easier as a whole to upgrade at a more faster pace rate, whether it's year after year or what have you. That being said, I understand the vast majorities get phones like these to last them 3, 4, 5 years. So it's a big leap to make. It's a big spend to make when you're spending $1,000+ on a smartphone. So again, the 13 is everything the 12 should have been. It hits in all the right places in all the main categories that it should when it comes to a smartphone, and it's more attention to detail of anything. So again, if you're on older devices, this is an upgrade worth making. If you're on the 12 series, it's one that you could arguably wait out, and even then, some of you on the 11 can maybe make do for another year until the next iteration comes out, which I would argue is going to be the best of this kind of latest and greatest of phones that we've seen, just due to the fact that the iPhone 13 took a lot of features that a lot of consumers have been wanting to see, both normal and prosumers, and then it's doing it for its first iteration. It's the first time we saw the ProMotion display. It's the first time we're seeing the cinematic mode. And with that, it's going to give Apple time to really take those features and fine-tune it for the next release. And I think that next release where we see them go away from the standard design language that we've come to know with like the 11 and 12 and now the 13, it's going to allow them to take that next leap in whatever that means from a hardware standpoint and whatever they're going to do internally to really redefine what is the iPhone. So again, a lot promising coming forward, but right now this is a substantial phone. This is a decent upgrade to make. And all in all, again, in my usage of the 13, comparing it to the 12, while I first thought it seemed like a minor upgrade at the surface, there's certainly a lot more than meets the eye. It's everything the jump from the 11 to the 12 I think should have been. Again, in any other smartphone, if you were to upgrade the display, the camera, the battery life, the performance, it's enough to justify a next-gen phone, and that's exactly what Apple did here. It's, again, more so attention to detail than earth-shattering. It's paving the way for what will be the future iPhone, and it's easy in this consistent upgrade cycle to not appreciate the things we have nowadays, whether it's things like the camera quality in the 13 Pro, the new 1TB model that they announced on the 13 Pro, etc. And while I'm sure Apple has a lot more already in store, I do feel this is a solid first iteration of what's to come. A lot, quote-unquote, more of the same. As always, if you enjoyed this review, please help me out and hit that like button. Consider subscribing for more content. And as always, thanks for watching.